The Big Three is up next, but let's take you right now to France, and that is where our own Andrea Mitchell is asking a question of Secretary Kerry. Let's take a listen.
Mr. Minister, 60% of the French public also opposes this action. Why wait for the UN inspectors? And would you feel strongly about joining the United States if the United States Congress says no?
Well, Andrea, I just, first of all, this case has not yet been made to the American people for more than a few days, and we will continue to make the case to the American people. You asked the question, why should an American think that this is valuable? I'll tell you why. And Laurent Fabius and I were talking about it as we walked outdoors. Because this concerns every American's security. This is not remote. This is not some far-off place where something happened that's just one Arab sect killing another Arab sect on some internal fight. These are chemical weapons which for almost 100 years the world has banned from usage. And in time of war, the only people who have used them are Adolf Hitler and Saddam Hussein, until Bashar al-Assad. Now, we know that there are security interests of the United States in the terrorists, the jihadists, who grow in that part of the world in their focus on the West, on Europe, on the United States, and elsewhere. And if these weapons fall into their hands, every American, everybody in Europe should be concerned. Sarin gas was used in the Tokyo subway. That's what we're talking about. As extremists grow in their power, which will happen if we don't take action, we will have licensed Hezbollah, Iran, and Assad to do what they want to the people of Syria. That's the consequence of walking away. The word of the world will be in question. Multilateral structures and organizations that we've spent years trying to build up to respond to these kinds of things. The principal one is the UN hasn't been able to respond because one nation keeps vetoing its ability, or two nations, to be able to act. So we're supposed to turn away because the UN itself has become a tool of ideology or of individual nations, and not say that the principle we put in place and have fought for all of these years is going to be thrown away? I don't think so. When you look at those videos of those children heaving for breath, unable to move, spasming, their lives stolen from them, or their parents' lives stolen from them by gas in the middle of the night when they should have been sleeping comfortably at home in their beds. Instead, they're wiped out by a man who has no conscience about what he does to his own people. Are we supposed to walk away from that? You know, President Clinton says the greatest regret that he has about his administration is that he didn't move on Rwanda. And history is full of instances where countries walked away from a responsibility and worse things happened, including war. If we don't confront this now, I promise the people of France and Europe and Americans, we're going to see this issue grow, and it will be required that we confront it in some other place at some other time where there may be a greater miscalculation. And what will Iran say if the United States backs down? What are the implications for each of the countries in the region, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, Turkey, others, who are just downwind from the weapons, depending on which way the wind blows, that Assad has chosen to use? This matters to Americans as a matter of security. The stability of the Middle East matters to Americans. It matters to Americans whether or not Syria implodes and breaks apart, and there are ungoverned spaces where terrorists call the shots. That matters to Americans. It matters to all of us, and I think we need to stand up and be counted, and so does my good friend Laurent, and we're going to keep talking about why this is important to all of us. And as Laurent said to me, for the people of France, il a dit, c'est vous qui êtes concernés. C'est vous qui êtes concernés, vous les peuples, les gens ici en France, les citoyens de la France. tout le monde. And I'll let Laurent.
Merci, John. Je dirais des choses voisines avec mes propres mots.
All right, there you're listening to John Kerry, and he is responding to our own Andrea Mitchell's question, and he's speaking, of course, aside the French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius, who is continuing in French. So I'm going to take this time and opportunity to bring in our Big Three panel: Democratic strategist Morris Reed, Republican strategist and MSNBC contributor Susan Del Percio, and MSNBC.com national reporter Erin Carmone. You guys, we're going to blow this up just a little bit, not have a traditional Big Three. I want to have you all respond to what you heard Secretary Kerry say. First thing to you, Morris Reed. He said that Syrians, the possibility of their implosion, that Americans care about that. Given what we have heard from town hall meetings across this country, particularly in this last week, do you agree with that? Do Americans care enough to do something about it?
Well, it's two parts. Yes, Americans that care when people are being wiped out and treated badly. So they do care about that. The second part of that is that explaining to the American people why they should care about getting involved in this particular situation. That's what the administration hasn't done well up to this point, and that's what you're hearing at these town hall meetings. So yes, Americans care about this from a macro sense, but in this micro sense, we haven't explained the urgency of the situation to them.
Okay, Susan, John Kerry says if we don't act now, what kind of a message does that send? And that he guaranteed that it would allow for an escalation of the use of chemical weapons down the road, a different time, a different place, perhaps an even greater force. Is that a compelling enough argument? Was that what you heard, Ness? Is that something that the president could then capitalize upon in his speech to the nation on Tuesday night?
Well, the bigger problem is that this should have happened about 10 days ago. As Secretary of State Kerry said, this concerns all Americans because it is a matter of national security. You cannot let nations use chemical weapons. And I think it would have been fine if the president would have done their military strikes and then reported to the American public. Now people don't understand. There's a lot of information out there, and I think Morris was right. The president now has to address the country and tell them this is a moral issue. They should be outraged at it. I think the president was really conflicted as the academic of wanting to bring it to Congress and the commander-in-chief and seeing what happened to these people, and I think is probably somewhat surprised that the American people haven't fallen in line, and most of all, that the other world leaders weren't right behind him.
Yeah, and Erin, a lot of the reason the other world leaders aren't right behind him is because they are waiting for the UN weapons inspector's report. A preliminary issuance of that may happen, later this week, but is that a cop-out? Are they just buying time? Is there really any question as to whether chemical weapons were used?
I don't think that at this point there are doubts about the intelligence from the margins, but I think the majority of people believe that something happened here that involved Assad's authorization. The problem is that many world leaders who have been our allies in the past are weary from the past from having been led down the path by the Bush administration. And the other problem is that they don't really see a strategic and meaningful game plan about what happens after this missile attack. What is the next step? How do they anticipate that Assad will respond? And I think they're wary of getting into a long-term quagmire like the ones we've seen in recent history.
Morris,
I tell you what, the world leaders are holding back. There's a cancer growing in this situation, and it's Iran. And until we step up and deal with this, our allies, all of them around the world in that part of the region want our help. There's a cancer. We don't want to wait till there's a Hitler situation. The world leaders need to step up, and so leadership, that's why they're elected in their positions.
Okay, Morris, do you think Iran really fears some sort of U.S. retaliation if they, as suggested, with Hezbollah placed inside Syria to launch strikes should the U.S. launch these Tomahawk missiles?
We are the only country that can refute and put these guys in check. They are bluffing, and they are bluffers. And until we step up and deal with them, we will continue to hear them talk this type of language.
But until we step up and deal with them, if we do not, we have talked about this red line being crossed in the sand. If we do not do something, how do you think our credibility is viewed by Iran and its leaders?
I think if we don't step up and deal with these guys, this will be a slippery slope and spiral out of control. This will embolden them to do other things. So they're already acting in Beirut, they're already acting in Iraq, and now they're acting in Syria. Who is next if America doesn't step up?
Susan?
Yeah, I completely agree with Morris on this one. And the interesting thing about Iran is that they like to, raise their head and scream a lot that they'll do this or they'll do that. But right now, they're fiscally being strangled by the rest of the world because they're not getting their commerce through through. They're not getting their oil bought at the same level that they were before. But, and Iran is important, but more importantly, right now, it is up to the president to make this moral argument and gain support among the American public. Once that happens, I think you'll see the other world leaders fall in line.
Do you think he's going to be able to do that, Erin Carmone?
I think, unfortunately, he's left the most recent summit with very little additional support. Domestically, he's having a lot of trouble, both in his own party from people who are already suspicious of war, from the emerging right-wing suspicion of war. So, unfortunately, I mean, the Obama administration has now been reduced to touting that they have the support of Bush administration officials who are, you know, the very ones that they said that they were going to replace and bring back credibility to the world stage. So I'm not terribly optimistic that Obama is going to be able to make the case, much as I think that he is sincerely upset and does want to act.
Well, if you want to bring credibility back to the world stage, it's about decisive leadership, whether you like George Bush or not. This is the right thing to do, and if Obama wants to show credible leadership, lead the world now.
Morris, that may well be the case, but to do that, he has appealed to Congress to back him up on this. So to all three of you, beginning with you, Morris, quickly, will he get the votes to do so?
No, he won't get the votes, and he still has to go ahead.
Okay, Susan?
I think at the end he'll get them.
You do?
Yes, I do. I think it'll be very narrow, but once the Congress comes back and sees all the videos and such and gets properly briefed, I think that there's enough undecided out there that it will go that way.
Erin, to you?
I think yes, absolutely. On the Senate, the House, it looks like a stretch.
Okay, my big three, my fabulous big three today. You guys, thank you so much for rocking and rolling with it. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Al.
That's a wrap, everyone,
Thanks.
of Weekends with Alex Witt. I'll see you right back here tomorrow at noon Eastern Time. Up next,